Good morning, Dan and Amy. And President Trump says we're this close to a Merry Christmas for all.
Now we're just days away. I hope. You know what that means, right? From keeping that promise and delivering a truly amazing victory for American families. We want to give you, the American people, a giant tax cut for Christmas. And when I say giant, I mean giant.
Yeah, and that's all well and good for 2017, but the real question is, will it guarantee a Merry Christmas for Republicans still in the majority in 2018? For more on that topic and also the Get Smart episode that's ongoing at the FBI, we're pleased to be joined by David Harsanyi, who is the nationally syndicated columnist and senior editor for The Federalist, thefederalist.com. David, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So what about the political implications of the tax bill, if it the tax cuts, if it delivers on what Trump profiled yesterday, for example, $2,000 in savings for the family of four making $75,000, which is, about a 3% bump in your take-home income, which is not life-altering, but it ain't bad.
Right. I mean, I think we don't know what the final bill will look like, but obviously there are things in there I think that many American people will like, though I do wonder how much of an effect that will have on their voting patterns. I think we've become far more tribalistic and less inclined to care about policy when we vote. I think it's more of a cultural thing these days, but that's just my opinion. We'll see. It can't hurt, not just because you're giving some middle-class people and others a tax break, but that the Republicans are actually going to accomplish something, which I don't think they've done in a very long time.
So, but these last-minute changes, doesn't it make the rich even richer? I mean, that's what I was hearing all for hours last night, that the rich people are going to keep their top earnings. It's going to go from 39% to 37%.
It looks that way, yeah. Rich will be richer.
Then what about the middle class? What does it mean for your average person?
Well, if you have kids, it's good. If the rates go lower. I mean, everyone who pays taxes will, looks like, get a tax cut, and obviously corporate taxes will go down. And I know liberals don't like to hear this, but I think corporate taxes are just a pass-through tax onto consumers anyway, so that could be somewhat helpful. But the bottom line is, rich people do pay most of the taxes, and they will probably benefit the most from any sort of widespread tax cut. That's just a fact, and I don't know that that's politically a great idea these days, to be honest, but we'll see.
Well, it seems like part of it is how you respond to the kind of mind-numbing incantation of the left to this, rich getting richer and this and that. What should the number be? Top 10% pay 75% of all federal income taxes. If that's not redistributive enough for you, what should the number be? Should it be 95? Should it be 99? Give me numbers, Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, rather than just your kind of lobotomized talking point.
Right. Well, first of all, it's unhealthy to have a small, have just, 10% of Americans paying most of the taxes, 80% of taxes, because, it's very volatile and it's just not a smart idea. You want to spread taxation around. I mean, people don't want to hear this, but moreover, your point is very smart. In addition to them obviously just constantly talking about how the rich get richer, the problem here is that we're not taking anything from anyone. They make it sound as if the rich are taking from the poor, that there's sort of a reverse redistribution of wealth. It's not how it happens. I mean, you obviously, wealth it's a zero-sum nonsense that is constantly part of Nancy Pelosi's talking points and everyone else. But the Republicans are terrible at pushing back on this stuff. They just don't have charismatic leaders that can make the point in the way, I hate to bring up Reagan, but that he did. So
truly,
that's their biggest problem.
Well, with this plan, it's good because there's still, you can deduct your medical expenses, teacher spending, and student loans.
Right. I mean, but there's also, the other part is the individual mandate that will be repealed. The Democrats argued that was a tax, which obviously it was just sort of masquerading as a tax. It's really a penalty, and that might have an effect, obviously, on health insurance and things of that nature. So it's complicated, and we don't really know how these things turn out. Obviously, the CBO will tell us, and they're almost always wrong, and I don't really blame them. They can only work with the information they have. So it's hard to say how this will affect elections next year, 2 years, 3 years from now.
A couple other provisions, just for the sake of consumption here, that matter. The mortgage interest deduction, they split the difference between the House and the Senate plan, $750,000 for newly purchased homes, which is a higher cap than the $500,000 limit that was passed in the House bill. And then also $10,000 in property taxes, or the combination of property taxes, state income taxes, and sales taxes can be deducted as well. So that's just another important note for people who live in high tax states like, I don't know, Illinois.
Illinois.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, with that, if this gets across the finish line, as it seems to be, getting there, then what's next on Trump and the Republican Party's agenda in the new year?
Widespread spending cuts. I'm kidding. That's not
Yeah,
gonna happen.
Of course, hilarious.
Yeah. And obviously, I just want to mention, I mean, that, for conservatives who have constantly worried and talked about debt, it seems weird that that's no longer really much of a concern for anyone, or maybe it's not weird. Maybe this is just how it works. But I'm not sure what's next. I think what has Trump talked about? I mean, I think that there has to be some sort of reform, healthcare reform. I mean, also because if you're going to take away the individual mandate, Obamacare is going to start to collapse. It already has started to collapse. And there has to be some sort of reform. I don't know if it's fixing Obamacare. I hope not, or a complete repeal. But that seems to be, for political reasons and for reasons that the American people need help. I think that should be next on the agenda.
And what about welfare reform?
Yeah, I don't know if this Republican Party has the spine to actually reform welfare, to go through welfare reform. And we also have to remember elections are going to be coming up, and everyone's going to be extra careful. It seems there's always an election coming up, I know, but welfare is a tough one.
And I'll tell you, it's not like Trump is some kind of ideologically pure minarchist, okay? I got that. But, I mean, the landscape in which he's dealing, you point up, this is something people need to remember. You've got a Republican Party, more so in the Senate than with the backbenchers in the House, but that you got a lot of big government Republicans there. And that's the landscape on which he's dealing, too. So you can hold Trump responsible for not trying to advance it, not using his bully pulpit, whether it comes to spending cuts or entitlement reform. But he's got to deal with a Republican Party that needs to find itself on some of these issues, too.
Right. I mean, entitlement reform has always been difficult, right? And I think the president is he's sort of a big government Republican, and especially on something like welfare reform, it seems to me he will have no appetite for that sort of thing. But it's not just him. You're right. I mean, in the Senate, you probably have 4 or 5 votes that are automatically off the table. You probably won't get any Democrats. We don't know what the Senate's going to look like in the future next year. Forget the House. So I don't know. Welfare reform to me, I wish it would happen, but it seems unlikely to me.
Speaking of the composition of the caucuses in both parties in both chambers, did Republicans dodge a bullet with Roy Moore's defeat?
I think I'm a sort of an outlier. I don't think it's as big a deal as everyone else does, in the sense that I think that voters compartmentalize these sorts of things. I'm not going to start voting for liberals just because Roy Moore got elected in Alabama.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't think it's helpful to have an accused child molester in the Senate. I don't want to say that I do, but I don't know that an accused rapist is president what meant that people would change their voting patterns as much as we think. It's definitely not helpful. I think this is better for Republicans because you're going to have an election again, in a year. So it's not as if Alabama's going to turn blue overnight. So I think this is better, but I don't think it's as big a deal as everyone else.
And when do you think Senator Al Franken will submit his resignation?
Seems weird that he made that speech, but he's still just hanging around. I think the Roy Moore loss probably means he has to go, because obviously pushing out Franken was all about being able to say, hey, Donald Trump, you need to go as well. And if Al Franken doesn't leave, Democrats don't have that talking point. So I imagine they'll push him out. I don't know when he's going to go. The sooner the better,
he's going to stay.
Opinion.
And it's worth noting that the replacement leveled up by Governor Dayton in Minnesota, not just that she's lieutenant governor, not just that she's a she, but also former VP of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood. I mean, that's really where the Democrat Party is. It's all identity politics and abortion all the time.
Right, and when you think about Alabama and the race there, and how many conservatives and others just dismiss the idea that the other guy you are voting for essentially is pro-abortion whenever and as long as you want it. So I think those things matter to voters more than maybe many mainline Republicans think. And those choices are more difficult than they believe. And it's also a sign that the Democratic Party, even in Alabama, can have a moderate on abortion run. That tells us something.
And one other topic I want to get your take on. Rod Rosenstein had a bit of a tough time on the Hill yesterday. Jim Jordan, I thought, was going to put him in a half Nelson before he left. But is the disposition, I guess it's a two-part question. One, leave Mueller. Two, special counsel for the special counsel. Where do you come down on those two questions?
I'm not a fan of special counsels only because I don't think I find them to be. There's a whiff of unconstitutionality about it and lack of due process in my book. But if we're going to have one, I'm all for more, basically. But in truth, I don't mind that FBI agents have opinions on things. I think that's fine. We all have opinions on things. I do mind when I hear about insurance policies, and I would like Congress to figure out what those agents were talking about, because then obviously you have a problem with an investigation. You've prejudiced yourself in a way. So, that's my problem. I don't know if we need a special counsel yet, but obviously there's something here that's important to look into. And but Mueller, this whole investigation now, half the country is not going to believe anything they say anyway. It's just such a giant mess. I don't know how we get out of it or where it ends.
He is David Harsanyi, nationally syndicated columnist and senior editor for The Federalist, thefederalist.com. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This only